Hello, everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium on Thursday, May 29th, 2025. And today I've got a lot of criticism of Mr. Trump. But before we get to that, I want to remind everybody that we do have a vid chat tomorrow afternoon at 2 p.m. We are going to go ahead with that. It appears that most of the storms and rain and so on will be moving out of my area by tomorrow. So we're going ahead with our normally scheduled vid chat tomorrow. Remember to get your questions and comments in today, no later than 10 o'clock U.S. Central Time. And folks, that timestamp is on my end. I don't know what the timestamp is on your end, but the only one that matters is the one I see. So please remember to, if you're questioning what the timestamp is on your submissions, get them in early, folks. And remember, we have that still, we're on that 3-hour schedule, so it's a first come, first served basis. So far, we've done pretty good, but I'm always cautioning people that if you want to make sure to get your comments and questions read and addressed, to get them in, the earlier the better. All right, now as I said, let's just put it this way. I'm running out of patience with the Trump administration, and I want to start by just a few remarks on his recent comments about President Putin and this ongoing war in the Ukraine. Frankly, I found Mr. Trump's remarks not only, and I'm going to use the word that Colonel Douglas McGregor used in a recent interview that he did on the subject. I not only found Trump's comments infantile, but my problem with Mr. Trump is and so many Americans looking at this situation between Russia and the Ukraine is that we are completely ignorant of the history. And I'm not saying that the history justifies either side in this war. I am saying that the United States began to meddle when it overthrew Yankovych, a duly elected Ukrainian president that had pro-Russian sympathies, overthrew him and installed the basis of the current regime, which has led to this mess. So, in other words, the United States started it, but it is in no position militarily or economically to finish it. Russia has resisted every sanction we've thrown at them. It has not hurt their economy one bit. And now we have a bunch of war-hungry European allies that think they're going to stop what is clearly a militarily disastrous situation in the Ukraine. So, Mr. Trump, get a clue. All the cards are in Mr. Putin's hands. I suspect that now the goal of the Russian operation is simply a complete and total regime change in Kiev. Now, what that means, in my opinion, is Russia may or may not have any more success with regime change, nation-building operations than we have. But I do know, and the Russians have made it very clear, that they are not willing to accept a continuation of the current regime in Kiev for a very good reason. And that reason is, even if they come to a ceasefire arrangement with that regime, leaving that regime in power will simply mean that it will cheat on any ceasefire arrangements, and they're going to have to start or restart in the future this special military operation. This is not in the cards. They are going to finish this one way or the other, and Mr. Trump, you'd better get a clue that whatever leverage or whatever you think the United States may have over Russia, it ain't going to happen. This is an existential matter for Russia. It is not an existential matter for the United States, and quite frankly, for all of you nutcases in the current federal chancellor of Germany's cabinet, it's not a matter for you existentially either. So that's my opinion on this, but let's turn to something closer to home, and that is President Trump's so-called sovereign wealth fund. And you may have heard this story that has come out by David Sachs, who is President Trump's so-called czar of cryptocurrency and also the fellow, incidentally, that is heading up this drive for Mr. Trump's sovereign wealth fund. Now, you know what I think. If those of you who are new to this website don't know what I think about Mr. Trump's sovereign wealth fund, I think basically the idea of a sovereign wealth fund is a good idea, but the way that Mr. Trump is going about it, I think, is a profoundly bad idea. Okay? So my first article that I want to share today is an article by Jim Hoft. It's titled, President Trump's Crypto Czar David Sachs Says Senator Elizabeth Warren was behind the Biden regime anti-crypto agenda and that she controlled the autopin. And I want to read just a few paragraphs from the very beginning of this article, because if this indeed is the position of Senator Warren, then for once I find myself in agreement with her and not with Mr. Trump. So here we go. Quote, in a fiery Fox Business interview on Tuesday, President Trump's newly appointed crypto and artificial intelligence czar. Now, what does that tell you right there, folks? That the whole scramble for artificial intelligence and a cashless cryptocurrency-based society is going to be necessitating the merger of artificial intelligence with the financial system. Folks, I don't know how to put it more bluntly. You're looking at a beast system. You will not be able to spend your own money in the way you see fit without following some remote bureaucrat's programmed AI guidelines on how to spend it. And that means, therefore, that cryptocurrency is not a currency because its value can be adjusted as circumstances and the individuals controlling those adjustments dictate. That's not a currency. So to continue. Trump's newly appointed crypto and AI czar David Sachs pulled no punches, directly accusing radical leftist Senator Elizabeth Warren of running the Biden White House's infamous autopin and using as a weapon to terrorize the crypto community. Now, I have no idea if Senator Warren was actually behind the control of Biden's autopin. I have no idea. But if she was opposed to the whole crypto digital cashless agenda, then kudos to her. Sachs, the Silicon Valley entrepreneur turned pro-Trump policymaker, and there it is, folks, right there. That's telling you that the digital cryptocurrency, artificial intelligence, new financial world that they're trying to put into place is the deep state controlling faction behind Mr. Trump. And that Mr. Trump is enabling the rollout of a tremendous surveillance system in the guise of a financial system redesign centered around artificial intelligence and cryptocurrency. I cannot put it more bluntly than that. This, folks, is financial tyranny and, if you will, fascism of the very worst order. And it's not fascism in a classical sense. Because in classical fascism, ownership of the industrial plant remains in private hands, and the government dictates the policy that that private ownership must follow. What we have now is a kind of reverse fascism where big corporations own the government and tell and dictate policy to it on what they do. But in either case, the result is tyranny. So to continue, Sachs, the Silicon Valley entrepreneur turned pro-Trump policymaker, didn't mince words during the interview. Quote, He accused Pocahontas Warren of waging a personal war against digital finance, calling her actions a, quote, pathological hatred, unquote, of crypto. Well, sign me on to the pathological hatred of cryptocurrency list, for reasons I'll get into in the second article in a minute. Sachs says, quote, this is the financial system of the future. In other words, artificial intelligence, cryptocurrency, and a cashless society. That's the financial system of the future. This is the financial system of the future, Jesse, and we have to encourage it. What the Biden administration was doing, and let's face it, it wasn't Biden. Elizabeth Warren controlled the auto pen during that administration. She, for some reason, has this pathological hatred of the crypto community. She wants to drive this community offshore. She doesn't want it happening in the United States. That's the wrong policy for the United States. We all want the innovation happening here. This is a financial system of the future. It's cheaper. It's more efficient. Remember what Mr. Trump said about producing pennies. Well, trust me, folks, if you get rid of pennies, you're going to end up paying more and more pennies on the dollar for your groceries and every other purchase you make. We all want the innovation happening here. This is the financial system of the future. It's cheaper. It's more efficient. We want it happening here, Jesse. And I think people are thrilled that President Trump is making that possible, unquote. So my question to you folks is, what happens when the administration finds out that it's much cheaper overall just to go to cryptocurrency, period, and not have to produce and maintain all that paper money and all those coins in circulation? Well, you lose your private media of exchange that protect your anonymity and is not capable of being revalued on the spot depending on how you behave according to the parameters that they dictate. That's where this is headed. Now let me add one more nasty bit of information to this whole pot for you. And if this doesn't rip the mask off of Mr. Trump's financial agenda for you, I don't know what will. This is a post by an article by Martin Armstrong. You all know him. He's a financial advisor. And please remember, folks, I am not making any financial advice by referencing this article. I'm simply referencing this article to point out a fact that is lurking behind all of this talk about cryptocurrency and sovereign wealth fund. And here we go. Quote, we know we are approaching a major high in Bitcoin when Trump Media and Technology Group, a publicly traded media company controlled by the U.S. President's family, announced a plan to purchase $2.5 billion worth of Bitcoin on Tuesday. This is a warning that we are in the throes of a typical bubble that will not end nicely. Now, let me stop right there and remind you that Mr. Trump's sovereign wealth fund, much of the assets he wants that wealth fund to control and trade in are, guess what? Cryptocurrencies, including Bitcoin. So in other words, this is an inside job. Let me continue. Quote, as a trader, you come to understand that every market, no matter what, acts the same because it is not the instrument, be it tulips, stocks, commodities, or bonds. It is human nature and the madness of crowds. As a crash becomes inevitable when 97% of the people are all long and they run out of fresh buyers. Like the Russian collapse because all the bankers were long and the hedge funds, then they tried to sell and discovered that they were the market. When they try to sell, the broker says there is no bid. Bitcoin is a trading vehicle like everything else. It is no exception to the rules of markets. It's just the next tulip or .com or AI craze. And I have to add to this. Let's remember what's going on here. I fear that the sovereign wealth fund, with all of its reliance upon so-called cryptocurrencies, which again, I remind you, are not currencies. Their value, if they become the principal primary mechanism of how you conduct normal day-to-day transaction, buying and selling, buying your groceries, purchasing your gas, paying your mortgage, if they become the standard mechanism, you have lost your financial sovereignty and pretty much lost it for good, because they can adjust the value of that blip on your computer screen depending on your behavior at the push of a button. Now here's the problem. What I think they're trying to set up is yet another, and I think that this is also the analysis of Catherine Fitz and what she's been trying to imply over several years of an analysis of this whole push for crypto coin. But if not, I'm just going to come right out and say it bluntly. You're looking at another asset grab, in this case the hard assets, which in the case of the federal government amounts to all of that land and other assets that are on the books of the federal government. These are hard assets. And what I suspect they're doing is setting up a situation where they will swap the computer blips of cryptocurrency for that pool of hard assets that the federal government sits on top of. That's the game. They're financializing those assets. And they're going to sell them off and leave the American people stuck with a bunch of blips on the computer screen. That's the game I think they're up to. Now, I could be wrong, and even if they're not up to that game, they are attempting to put into place a cashless society. This is my whole problem, as I've been saying over and over, with all these state bullion depositories. Those bullion depositories are fine, provided you get a physical medium of exchange based on the certificates of deposit, or the certificate of deposit itself is a physical certificate that you can by law mandate be accepted as legal tender in transactions. But so long as they're merely giving you an electronic transference system, then you do not have a real system of sound money, of bullion-backed money. And by the way, let's remember what else I've said in the past about why they're trying to set this up. They're telling you that this is bullion-backed, and indeed it is, but here's the problem. Sound money to us means you can go into your bank and trade your paper dollar for a little gold coin that's worth $1, or a little slightly larger silver coin that's worth $1. All right. The problem is that a bullion backing of the dollar now occurs at nowhere near that par value swap. In fact, if you were to trade a paper dollar for its equivalent amount of gold, you'd get a tiny little speck or flake of gold. So the reality is, because the dollar has been so devalued, they are now talking about, quote unquote, backing the dollar with bullion without a revaluation of the par value of the dollar. And that means, therefore, that you're not going to want the physical equivalent of your dollar. They're presenting you a fiction that's based on a much smaller fraction of bullion, and it's because of that fiction and the much smaller fraction of bullion that they're trying to put into place the electronic transfer systems for those dollars. So in other words, the whole thing, folks, is a scam. Now, if you don't believe me that they're doing this, please, please, please go get my my forthcoming book that's supposed to be coming out in June, The Rialto and Richmond Reconstructed, and pay attention, because what they're doing is they're running the same program, they're just updating it a bit. The Rialto and Richmond Reconstructed. We're looking at version 2.0, a massive plunder operation based on quote-unquote so-called sound money. So, folks, please don't say that I didn't try to warn you. These policy measures, from the foreign policy disaster that we're looking at vis-a-vis Russia and the Ukraine, to this unmitigated scam and, quite frankly, cryptocurrency swindle that they're trying to set up with this sovereign wealth fund. I am totally opposed to it. So there you have it, folks. That's our news and views for the day. Don't forget, we do have the vid chat for tomorrow afternoon. That will take place at 2 p.m. Get your comments and questions in no later than 10 p.m. U.S. Central Time tonight. Bye-bye, everybody. We'll see you on the flip side, and God bless.